Welcome back to Monster Tamer, a 2D Pokemon-like RPG created with Phaser 3. Previously, we discussed the battle state machine we're going to be implementing for our game, and we discussed the various battle states and what each one represents and the logic that's going to go inside each of these states. And so now that we have the groundwork laid for what we want to do, it's time to actually go ahead and implement that in our code. So if you missed the previous videos, there'll be links in the video description to the source code up to this point, as well as the complete source code for this video. There'll also be a link to the previous videos if you'd like to catch up. So let's get started. All right, so to get started, what we're going to do is we need to go ahead and create our state machine class. So if we can go ahead and open up our source code, let's go into the source folder. Then under our utils, let's go ahead and add a new file. We're going to call it statemachine.js. And so let's go ahead and export out our class. And so we'll have our state machine class. And we'll go ahead and add in our constructor. And so for our state machine, we're going to just take two parameters. The first one's going to be an ID. So the ID is going to be a unique identifier for the state machine, and we'll be using that for any logging we do. So we want our state machine to be reusable, and so if we have more than one instance, we need an easy way to identify it. The second one's going to be context, and this is going to be optional. And so this is going to be the context that will be used when we're invoking methods on our various states. So if you can imagine, when we define our states, we might want to have a different context than the context of where that state is at. A good example of this is inside our battle scene. All of our states, we're going to want the state, we're going to want our context of our battle scene. So we want to be able to access the properties from our battle scene. And so we're going to have to be able to pass in that context so that we've used the this keyword, we have that. And so to do that, what we'll do is we're just going to add our ID. And so context. And then what we need to do is we're going to go ahead and store these on our class. So we're going to do a new property, a new private property, this ID. We'll set equal to our ID. We'll also do this for context. And so we'll set equal to context. So let's go ahead and add those properties to our class. And then what we'll do is for our ID, it's going to be a string. So we'll add @type, and we'll have a string. And then for our context, this is just going to be an object. So we'll have a type, and it's going to be object. And we'll also allow it to be undefined. So we're not going to make this a required parameter. We'll make it optional. So what we'll do is in our constructor, let's go ahead and define that so it's very explicit. And so we'll have the ID will be our string, and this is going to be an object, and we'll go ahead and make it optional. All right, so for our state machine, we're going to need a few additional properties. The first one is we're going to need a way to keep track of all the states that are tied to our state machine. And so a good data type for this is we're going to go ahead and use a map. So what we're going to do is we'll make a new property called states, and this is going to have a type of a map. And for our map, it's going to be a string, and we're going to map it to a state. And we've not defined our state yet, but this will be a type we need to define. The next one we'll need on our class is we're going to know what the current state is. And then that way we know what the possible transitions are and what logic should be done. So we're going to go ahead and add in our current state. And so for our current state, what that's going to be is that's going to be a state, or it's going to be undefined. So when we first create our state machine, there will be no state, and there is a possibility that we might want to clear the state. So we're going to allow it to be undefined. So we'll have our ID, we'll have our context, and then what we need to do is we need to check if we're actually changing a state. So if we are currently in the middle of changing a state, we don't want to change to another state until that's completed. So we're just going to have a Boolean to keep track of this. So let's go ahead and add that in. And then what we'll need to do is we need to keep a queue of states we need to change to. So for our state machine, we're going to want to run logic when we do our transitions. And so when we're doing our transitions, we need to be able to go through one state to the next based on the order that we call the setState method. So if you imagine if we have three states, 1, 2, and 3, and I say I want to change the state to 1, change the state to 2, change the state to 3, I need to wait until all of that logic is done. So I need to make sure 1 and 2 are done before I go to 3 instead of jumping from 1 to 3. And this will make more sense once we actually get to our code. So we're just going to add a new property. So we're just going to call this changing state queue. And this is going to be an array of our state names. So it's going to be strings. So we'll have our @type, and we will have a string array. So then what we're going to do is in our constructor, we're going to go ahead and add some of our default values. So we'll have isChangeState. We'll set that to false. We will have our change state queue. We're going to set that to an empty array. Then we'll have our current state, which will be undefined when we create our state machine. And then finally, we'll have our states, and this will be equal to a new map. And so now that we have the basic properties that we need for our state machine, we need to define our actual state. And so what we'll do is we'll come to the top of our file. Let's go ahead and add in a type def. So we're going to have a new type definition for our state, and this is going to be an object. And on our object, we're going to expect a few properties. The first one is going to be the name. So we need to have a unique state name for each of our states. Then that way, when we transition, we can use that name to know which state we need to transition to. So we'll have a string, we'll have it be a name, and then we're going to have one more property. And this is going to be a callback function. And so we'll have a function that returns nothing, so void, and we're going to call this onEnter. And so as we discussed before, for our state machine, typically there'll be a number of methods that we'll want to implement to do certain things with our states. Typically this is like onEnter, so do this when we first enter the state. OnExit when we need to do any cleanup. OnUpdate would be called every tick of our game loop. But currently for our existing logic, we only need one of these, and that'll be the onEnter. So this will be logic we run when we first enter the state, and we won't have to do any cleanup at this time. So for right now, we'll keep our states very bare bones, and we can add functionality later if we need to extend it. And so now that we've defined our state, what we need to do is we need to go ahead and add in our methods to our state machine class. So for our methods, the first one's going to be we need the capability to add states. So we'll need to be able to pass in a state to our state machine, and then we'll need to go ahead and store that in our states map. Then what we'll need to do is we'll need the ability to set a state. So we need to be able to take a string, check to see if we have that state, and if we do, we need to go ahead and transition to that state. While we're also doing that, we're going to need to check to see if we already have a queue built up, and if so, add it to our queue. Otherwise, we'll go ahead and do our transition now. And then finally, what we'll need is we'll need a way to update our state machine. So we're going to need a way to clear that queue. And so what we're going to do is we're going to expose an update method to allow us to call this on every update of our game loop. And then what we can do is we can use that to transition and clear out our change state queue. So to get started, what we'll do is let's go ahead and start with our update method. So what we're going to do is we'll have a new public method. We're going to call it update. And inside here, we're going to check our queue length. So if our changing state queue.length is greater than 0, then what we need to do is we need to go ahead and grab that first element from our queue. So we need to shift it out of our array, and then that way we can go ahead and set our state to that element. So we're going to go call a method we don't have yet, but this will be another public method we'll do next, and it's going to be setState. And so inside setState, we're going to grab our changing state queue, and we'll shift out that first element, and then we're going to go ahead and return. And actually, we don't need to return because this will be the only logic we're doing. And then what we're going to do is let's go ahead and define this method. So let's go ahead and define setState. And so when we set a state, we expect the state name as our only parameter. So what we'll do is we'll add in a parameter called name. And we'll go ahead and add in our type. And for now, we're just going to do to-do. And let's go ahead and define our other public method, and this is going to be addState. So we're going to have addState, and We will expect state as a parameter, and we're just going to add to do. Let's go ahead and add our JS doc. And so this will be a state object. All right, so let's go ahead and start with our addState method. So for our addState method, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and reference our states property, and we're going to call the set method on our map. And so with a map, what we want to do is provide a key, so the unique value for where something's going to be stored in our map, and then the value will be the item that gets stored in that map, and this will be our state. So what we're going to do is we'll have our state name be our key, and so if we ever provide another state with the same name, this is going to override whatever's stored inside our map. And so then for our value, we're going to go ahead and pass in our state.name. So we're going to create a new state object instead of passing in the one that was provided. And the reason for that is because we're going to have to change the context in a second. So then what we'll do is we'll do on enter, and we're going to do our state. And if our on enter was provided. All right, and so that's going to go ahead and add our state to our map. But what we need to do is we need to check to see if our context was set when we create our state machine. And if it was, then we need to go ahead and bind that context to our onEnter method. So to do that, what we're going to do is we're going to do this context. We're going to go ahead and check it. So if it exists, then what we'll do is we will do our state onEnter, and we are going to do, and we need to make sure it exists. And if it does, then we'll do bind, and we're going to go ahead and bind our context. We're going to go ahead and bind our context from our state machine. Otherwise, what we want to do is we just want to do our state onEnter method that was provided. All right, so this will allow us to add new states to our state machine. And so now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and add our logic for setting our state. So what we'll need to do is in our setState method, the first thing we need to do is we need to check to see if our states map actually has a state that was provided. So what we'll do is we'll add an if statement, and we'll do if not this states, and we'll use the has method to return a Boolean value if a key exists on your map. And so we'll go ahead and provide our state name that was provided to our method. And if it doesn't exist, we're going to go ahead and return. But in addition to that, we're just going to add a console log statement, so then that way we're aware of this. So what we'll do is we'll do const. Let's go ahead and do our method name, and we'll set it equal to setState. Then what we're going to do is, before we return, let's do a console.warning. And inside here, we're going to go ahead and reference our state machine.name. So that way we get the name of our class, and we'll do dash. We're going to go ahead and reference our ID so we know which instance this is. And then we're going to do colon, and let's go ahead and do our method name. And so we'll have our method name, and then that way we know exactly where this log line is coming from. And we'll say tried to change to unknown state, and we'll go ahead and add in that state name that was provided. Then that way it's very clear to the user in the logs what happened here. Then what we're going to want to do is we're going to want to check our current state. And if our current state is the one we're trying to change it to, we don't need to do anything. So we can go ahead and return early. And so what we'll do is we're going to we'll add a new method. So we're just going to do if this, and we'll call this isCurrentState. We'll make it a private method. And if it's true, we'll go ahead and return early. Then what we'll do is let's go ahead and add in this method real quick. So we'll add in our private method, and we'll do if not this current state. We can go ahead and return false. So if our current state is undefined and not set, we know it's not the current state then. Otherwise, we just want to return if our current state name is equal to the name that's provided. So we'll need to go ahead and add that as a parameter. And then we're going to expect that to be a string. And it's going to go ahead and return a Boolean. All right, and then we'll go ahead and pass our name in here. And so then if the name of the state that was provided is not our current state, we need to go ahead and check our queue. So if we're already in the middle of changing states, what we're going to want to do is push this into our queue. And so to do that, we'll go ahead and use our property. We'll do if this is changing state, then what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to do this. We'll do changing state queue, and we're going to push in the name that was provided. And we'll go ahead and return so we don't go ahead and transition. Otherwise, what we need to do then is we're going to set is changing state, and we're going to set it equal to true, because now we're actually going to start our transition if none of the other criteria is met. So what we're going to do is let's go ahead and we're going to add a console log so it's very clear that we're changing our state. So we're going to say, instead of a warning, let's go ahead and do a log. We'll say our method name, and we're going to say change to, and so we'll say from our current state name, and we'll say to our name. And then what we need to do is if our current state is not set, we should actually make sure that's optional. And if it's not set, what we'll do is we'll have a default value of none, and then that way we shouldn't have any errors in our log statement. So then what we need to do is after our log statement, we need to go ahead and update our current state to be that state. So what we'll do is we'll do this current state will be the state that we're going to get. So we're going to do this states, we're going to get our map, and we'll use the get method, pass in our name, and this will return that state. Then finally, what we want to do is we want to call that onEnter callback function if it was provided in our state. So we're going to see if it exists. So if this current state dot onEnter exists, then what we want to do is we want to go ahead and call that, and we'll do onEnter. Otherwise, once we're done with that, we're going to go ahead and set this changing state, and we'll set it equal to false. And one last thing we're going to do is we're going to add one more console log statement. We're going to show that we called the onEnter method. So what we'll do is we're going to say in our function, and we'll do our state name. So current state name, and we'll say onEnter invoked. All right, so for our class, the last thing we're going to do is we're going to add a getter to get the current state name. Otherwise, it will return undefined if one is not set. So we'll come up to the top of our class. Let's add get, and we'll get our current state name. And we'll go ahead and return this, our current state. And if we'll add the option to see if it's actually exists. And we will return name. So otherwise it's going to return undefined if it doesn't exist. So let's go ahead and add in our type. So this is going to be a string or undefined. All right, and so this getter, this is just going to be a way for us to get the current state name from our battle scene class. And then that way we can do logic based on the state that we're currently in. All right, so with that, we have our base state machine class actually built. And so what we need to do now is we actually need to test our functionality and make sure all of our logic is actually working. All right, so to go ahead and test our logic, what we'll do is let's go ahead and open up our scenes, our battle scene. Then what we'll do is we'll come to the bottom of our create method. And what we'll do is after we show our main battle menu, we'll go ahead and create our state machine. So let's go ahead and add a new property. We'll say battle state machine. We'll set it equal to a new state machine. We'll create a new instance. And for our ID, we'll just do battle. And we're going to go ahead and pass in the context of this phaser scene. And then that way we'll have that context. And then what we'll do real quick is let's add that new property. So we'll add in our battle state machine. Go ahead and add in our type. And so this is going to be a state machine. And then what we'll do is now that we have our state machine, we need to go ahead and define a state. So what we'll do is we'll do this, and we'll do our battle state machine, and we're going to do addState. And so for our name, we'll just call this intro. And we will define our onEnter callback. And so for this callback, what we're going to do is we'll add a delayed called. So we're going to use our phaser time delayed call method to go ahead and have this logic be invoked after a second. So we'll have our delayed call. And what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and set our state to a new state. So we'll do this state machine. And we'll do setState. And let's go ahead and make a new one. We're going to call this battle. And so after that, what we need to do is we actually need to go ahead and add this new state. So what we're going to do, we're going to copy this code here. Let's go ahead and paste that. And we're not going to do onEnter for battle for the time being. We just want to make sure this all works. We're going to do battle. We'll go ahead and save. And so when our scene refreshes, nothing appears to be happening. And what's happening is when we create our state machine, we don't have a state. And since we never actually set this state, nothing happens with our state machine. So what we need to do is after we add our states, we need to go ahead and set it to one of our two states that we defined. So if I do battle state machine, if I do set state, and I'm just going to set it to test, what should happen is we should get our warning message that we try to transition to an unknown state test, and that's exactly what we get in our console log. Now, if I go ahead and change this to intro, what should happen is we should see now in our logs, we should see logs tied to our state machine. So we'll see right away that we changed from no state into intro, and then we'll see that our onEnter was invoked. So any logic we we added here will invoke. And then finally we transition from intro to battle. And so now we've shown that we have the core logic in place for having our state transitions. All right, so now we've validated that our state machine logic is actually working. That's going to bring it into this video. So in our next video, what we're going to do is we're actually start adding in all of our states that we defined previously for our battle scene, and then we'll start adding in our logic to connect everything together. And then that way we should have a working battle end to end using our state machine. So as a reminder, there's a link in the description of the video to the complete source code for this video. And as always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the content. If you did enjoy the video, please consider liking the video and hitting the bell icon to be notified when the next video in the series is released. For more great Phaser 3 content, please see some of the links on your screen now.